So if you haven't watched the setting up the library video, then I recommend going back to the beginning of this crash course series and checking that video out. And secondly, if you don't see this little icon here and you're on a lower resolution screen computer, then you may need to bring your mouse down over this little menu and scroll your middle mouse button, your mouse wheel up or down. And finally, if you don't see this little icon at all, then you need to get the latest version of Sensei Format, which you can download at blendersensei.com. So this is just a real folder on my computer that has other real folders in it with various 3D assets such as images, textures, brushes, models, example files, and stuff like that I keep on my computer. So what this button will do is expand whatever folder we happen to be in. So this little up arrow button here, this means go up a folder or up a directory, depending on whatever you want to call it. So if we were to click this, here was the folder we were inside, this library folder. So I could click here and go back down into it. But if I press this button, it will expand into thumbnail view, whatever folder I happen to be in. So if I were to click it here, here is these same folders, but in thumbnail view. So I could click it back to close it. And so say I were to go into my examples folder and then click it here. Here are some example files that we've made since the beginning of this tutorial series. And so for instance, I could just click this and drag and drop it directly into the 3D view. And this scene is opened up here. Very cool. Of course, I can actually drag and drop any of these files. If I could just click them by their icon without expanding this, I could close this back up and simply select something like this and just drag it into the 3D view and open it that way. But we can add files together by using the append button. So for instance, if I were to press File and New, Reload Startup File here, click this button to re-expand my library here. So I could right click and move my 3D cursor over here, because wherever I move this cursor is where the stuff will be added to. I could click this subsurf modeling.blend here and then press append, which basically just means to add it to the scene. And then right mouse click to move my cursor over here and click on this draw mesh monkey bust and press append there. And that gets added to the scene. Or I could click this object from selection file and move my cursor over here so it will be added to that location, press append. And now all of these files have been added to this scene. Now, what append does, it adds these files, but it adds basically a duplicate of these files. So if we change something like, say, these glasses here, say we were to scale them or add a material to them or something like that, that won't change it back in the original file. It's just basically added a copy of that for us to work with in this scene. So there's a way to dynamically link one file to another, so you can actually update between files through dynamic linking, but we're going to save that for the next video. To the left of this is this down arrow key, which what this will do is simply save your current file. If the file hasn't been saved yet, it will generate a name for that file and just save it. So kind of the ideology behind these icons is that this up arrow icon, the idea here is kind of like, okay, so bring some stuff up from out of this library area into the file. So if we click that, it's like, okay, so what are we going to bring up into here? And then so the down arrow was like, okay, now bring whatever's open back down into the library. In other words, save it. So if I were to actually go to File and press Save, then a file menu would be brought up for us to first give this file a name, because the file we're actually working on doesn't have a name. So if a file doesn't have a name and we press this button, then it will just be dropped down into whatever folder that happens to be open, and its name will be given whatever object happens to be selected. This allows us a super quick way to save files, especially if we're like doing a bunch of tests and things like that. So I could just click this, and the last active object in our scene was this Suzanne, so this file was just named suzanne.001.blend. But of course, as soon as we drop that in here, we can rename it to, whatever by just right-clicking on it, and we could call this my super cool file. And when you rename the blend files, you do want to leave the .blend on there, otherwise it will get lost. And then so it's moved over there because these are alphabetically organized, but there it is. Keep in mind though that if you change the name of this file, then the current file you have open won't be the same as the one you changed the name of. So if you press this save button again, it's going to just repeat the same process it did. So after you save it the first time and then rename it, you will probably want to go ahead and click here and drag it into the 3D view. And so now whenever you press the save button again, it will save to the name that you changed it to. But that's only necessary if you're saving a file this way for the first time and or if you haven't already just gone to File and Save As or whatever. For instance, any other file that we were to say like drag and drop to open up and we like made some change to or something, we could just quickly save those changes by pressing this button and then it would just save. So another cool thing too is that we can set up what these thumbnails will look like, but just by simply positioning our camera. So say I wanted my thumbnail for this file to look like this. I just do this and then I come here and then press my button, which saves the file, and that's what the thumbnail will look like. So if we come up here to File and down here where it says Import, we click this. These are all the different file types that Blender can by default import. So it can import .dae, .3ds, fbx, .bvh, which are motion capture files, SVG, which you can save an Illustrator file out as an SVG to like load up an Illustrator file like that, and so on. So this awesome assets library, the append button, doubles as an importer. So rather than having to come here and pressing import and then selecting this, then open up the file browser, then select all that stuff, all you have to do is select any file that's capable of being imported and then press append. So if I were to click up here on my library and in my models folder, I have a bunch of different folders of different types of models, and some of these are full of .blends and some are full of other types. For instance, if I were to click on this helicopter folder, and I'm going to go ahead and close up the expand library button and press it again, which will bring me to this location. Press Blackhawk here. .obj is one of the file types we can import, as we see right here. So I would just click this, and then I could either delete all this stuff or I could just simply add this to the scene and press append. And when we do, we get this helicopter. Of course, it's really big, so I might want to press S to scale this down a bit. I downloaded this model off of a free model site. There's tons of free 3D model sites out there where you can get this kind of stuff. The rest of these files in here are image files that have to do with the textures. One thing about importing these file types is there's no real guarantee that Blender is going to properly interpret the materials and textures and everything like that. So you may have to manually reconstruct the way the materials are attached to the object, and we'll actually get into that in another video, but just be aware of that. But typically the mesh will all come in good. And so we can't see like a .obj by a special thumbnail, but if we were to say clean this up, make this look good, and then click this button to save it back down as a .blend file, then we would be able to see this whole file as a simple helicopter thumbnail that we could either drag and drop into our view to open up that file, or just append it like any other object we can with a .blend file. So I'll show you a few other examples of the type of files we can import. I'm going to press this button to hide my library and click my up directory arrow to go back up some. And say in my utilities folder, I have a folder dedicated to SVGs, which are a file type that we can import here, SVG there. And then so if I press my expand library button, I only actually have one SVG in here at the moment, but I could click this, press append, and when I do, I've brought this kind of Illustrator style file here into Blender. Another file type we can load are motion capture or .bvh. So if I were to click this, and I'll go ahead and tap A and tap X to delete all this stuff. Here in this female 01 folder, which is the only motion capture files that I have, and I downloaded this off a free site as well. These are royalty-free motion capture files. And I'm going to dedicate a video to how to properly do this kind of stuff too, but I just wanted you to be aware that it exists. So I'm going to close up my library, click it to open it up again. And so we've got all these different motion capture files. So we could just click one here, press append. And this actually brings in an armature with these motion capture files attached to it. So I'll click that to hide that. And then if we press play here, we can actually watch this motion capture file in action. A minute ago, I had a file open where I'd actually taken one of my old models and just parented it to the armature from that motion capture file, and I'll show you what that looks like. So if I press my up arrow, and I believe that was in my examples folder. So I'll click my expand library button there, and since this is a .blend, I can just click and drag it in, which will open up the whole thing rather than append the file to what was already open. And so if I press play, we have that same motion capture file armatured to an object here. So just a quick example of kind of this stuff that you can import into your Blender files super easily with our assets